I never thought it would happen like this. It wasn't the first time that my mother-in-law, Linda, had made her presence felt in our home. She had a way of inserting herself into every corner of our lives, always there to offer advice, whether it was asked for or not. But I thought, after all these years of marriage, I had built a solid enough space for myself, a little haven within the walls of our home. Apparently, I was wrong. It was a quiet evening when Mark, my husband, came home from work. He looked off, which immediately made me uneasy. I'd just finished making dinner, the smell of garlic and roasted chicken filling the house. I glanced up at him, expecting the usual greeting, a kiss, a laugh, a casual comment about his day. But this time, there was none of that. Instead, Linda walked in behind him, wearing that smug look I knew all too well. The one that said, "I'm about to drop a bombshell, and you won't have a say in it." "Jessica," she started, her voice already carrying that false sweetness, "I need you to leave the house for a little while." I froze, the wooden spoon in my hand halting midair. "What?" "You heard her," Mark said, his voice strained, like he was trying to calm the waters that were already starting to churn. "Tina's pregnant. And she needs peace and quiet." "We thought it would be best if you..." "Wait," I interrupted, my heart pounding in my chest. "You want me to leave my house? For her?" Linda nodded, a calculated smile on her face. "Yes, dear. I think it's for the best. You know, Tina needs comfort during her pregnancy. And you've been so understanding in the past. I'm sure you can understand this too." I glanced at Mark, searching for any trace of solidarity. But he was looking at the floor, avoiding my gaze. "Tina?" I repeated, my voice growing tighter with each word. "Your precious Tina, the one who can't stand the smell of my cooking or the way I decorate. You want me to leave my home. For her?" Mark shifted uncomfortably. "It's just for a few weeks, Jess. She's family." Family. That word. Always used as a shield for whatever Linda wanted. Whatever Tina needed. But it didn't seem to apply to me when I needed something, did it? "I'll pack," I said, my voice flat. I didn't want to argue anymore. The damage was already done, and if I stayed any longer, I would have said things I could never take back. Things that would have changed everything forever. Linda beamed, practically glowing with the satisfaction of having gotten her way. "Thank you, dear. I knew you'd understand." The next 2 hours passed in a blur as I packed up the life I had built in that house. I gathered my things, clothes, books, the few cherished mementos that had made the house feel like mine. Mark didn't help. He didn't even try. He sat in the living room, scrolling through his phone, letting his mother and sister dictate the terms of my departure. When I had finished, the house felt emptier somehow. Like it was no longer mine. Like I had been replaced by someone else's needs, someone else's expectations. Tina's needs. Linda's whims. Mark walked me to the door, but he didn't offer a hug. Didn't say anything reassuring. He just stood there, silent, as I grabbed my suitcase and made my way to the car. "You'll be okay," he said, his voice hollow. "It's just for a little while." For a little while. Right. I wasn't sure what stung more, the fact that I was being cast out of my home, or the fact that the man I had loved for years wasn't even willing to stand up for me. It's strange, isn't it? How quickly the world can change in the span of a single evening. One moment, you're in your home, surrounded by the people you trust, and the next, you're on the outside looking in, forced to wait for someone else to tell you when, or if, you're ever allowed back in. I stayed at my friend Rachel's house for a few days, trying to figure out what to do next. It wasn't exactly comfortable, but it was better than the alternative of staying with my parents. Rachel let me vent and cry, but she also gave me the space I needed to think. I knew I couldn't just sit around and wait for Mark to come to his senses. If I did, I'd be waiting forever. But what was I supposed to do? The house was still technically our house, Mark's and mine. But now that Tina was in the picture, and Linda had her claws in everything, I didn't know where I stood anymore. I didn't want to fight. I didn't want to be the one who had to tear everything apart. But there was one thing I knew for sure: I wasn't going to sit back and let them walk all over me. That's when the idea came to me. I called my lawyer, a woman I had worked with on some other matters in the past. We'd discussed wills and estates, but this was different. This time, it was about protecting what was mine, my home. I need to take action, I told her. I want to protect myself. And my house. After speaking with my lawyer, I had a clear vision of what I needed to do. I couldn't just stand by and let Mark, Linda, and Tina make me a passive bystander in my own life. The house we lived in was as much mine as it was Mark's, and I wasn't going to allow them to take it from me. I needed to be strategic. I wasn't just going to confront them head-on, I was going to make sure they knew I had thought of everything. The first step was making sure I had all my legal ducks in a row. My lawyer confirmed that, since the house was purchased with both our names on the deed, it technically couldn't be taken from me without due process. However, I knew that if I was going to assert my rights, I had to act fast. I needed leverage. And what better way to strike than at their wallets? I started by going through all of our joint bank accounts and credit cards. For years, Mark and I had shared everything. He relied on me for his financial stability, and I'd always handled the household accounts, paying bills, organizing the savings, and making sure everything was running smoothly. It had never occurred to me that, in the eyes of my husband and his family, this might have made me an easy target. They saw me as a soft spot. But now, I would turn that very thing into my weapon. I called the bank and withdrew my name from every account that was in both of our names. I didn't just transfer the money into my own accounts, I cleared everything. I wasn't about to leave him with access to any of it, especially when I knew he wouldn't hesitate to use it against me if given the chance. Then, I moved on to the house. I knew that, technically, the rent was supposed to be paid by both of us. But I also knew Mark had been slacking off. He never took the initiative to pay on time, always leaving that responsibility to me. Linda, of course, had never helped with the bills. She was too busy making sure Tina got whatever she needed, especially now that Tina was pregnant. I contacted the property management company. I arranged for the rent to be due in 2 weeks, ensuring that Mark would be hit with the reality of his situation when the due date came. I was certain he'd ignore the payments or make excuses, and when the notice came, he'd find himself with no money, no support, and no way to pay. But I wasn't done yet. The final piece of my plan was to send them a notice of eviction. Technically, since I was still part of the household, I had every right to evict them if they were staying there without my consent. I wasn't going to let them walk all over me, not when I had the upper hand. So, I drafted the legal documents and sent the notice, giving them 30 days to vacate the property. The rent was due, and if they didn't pay, the next step would be eviction. I didn't feel any sense of guilt. Not yet. I had tried to be patient, tried to respect Mark and Linda's demands. But now, it was time to take control. This house, these bills, this life, I had worked so hard to build it. I wasn't going to let them destroy it for their own selfish desires. 2 weeks passed. During that time, I stayed in Rachel's guest room, working on my plans, keeping my distance from Mark, and letting the dust settle. I knew what I was doing would have consequences, but I wasn't going to let that stop me. I had no intention of going back to that house, not after how they treated me. Then the phone call came. It was Mark, and his voice was strained, nearly frantic. "Jessica," he said, his voice rising in pitch. "Why did I just get a notice about eviction? What the hell is going on?" I leaned back in my chair, a small, satisfied smile tugging at my lips. This was it, the moment I had been waiting for. I took a deep breath, ready to explain, but I didn't want to rush this. He needed to hear every word clearly. "You really don't know?" I said, my tone calm and calculated. "Well, Mark, the rent was due. And guess what? I'm not paying it anymore. I took my name off all the accounts. You can't access anything, and you didn't pay the bills like you were supposed to. I've done everything for you, for us, for years. And now, it's time for you to face the consequences of your actions. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could almost hear him processing the situation. Mark had always been the type to coast, to avoid confrontation until it was absolutely necessary. And now that everything was crashing down, he had no idea how to handle it. "This isn't right, Jessica," Mark finally said. "I can't believe you're doing this. We're married. This is our house." I nearly laughed. "You're right. It was our house. But it was my money paying for it. It was my effort, my patience, my time. You and your family have taken advantage of me for too long. This is the result of your actions." I paused, letting the weight of my words settle in. He wasn't used to me standing up for myself. I think he was still reeling from the shock that I had finally had enough. "Mark," I continued, my voice a little softer now, "you can't just walk all over me anymore. Linda and Tina may have ganged up on me, but I'm done. This is where it ends." Mark didn't respond immediately. Instead, I heard his voice crack. "What about the house, Jess? What are we going to do? You're going to figure it out. Just like I always had to. But this time, you're going to do it on your own. I won't be there to bail you out. I've had enough." There was another pause. But this time, it wasn't silent with shock. It was silent with regret. Regret that it had to come to this. But in the end, regret wouldn't help him. Actions did. A few hours later, Linda called. "Jessica," she said, her voice trembling, "you can't do this. Mark is beside himself. He doesn't know how to handle this. You've ruined everything." "Don't pretend you care, Linda," I replied coolly. "You were more than happy to see me go. And now, you get to deal with the consequences of your own actions. You and Tina can go ahead and make your plans now. But this house? It's not your playground anymore." I ended the call before she could argue any further. The next few days were a whirlwind of emotions. Chaos and regret. The initial shock of receiving the eviction notice had worn off, but the repercussions were just beginning to sink in. Mark, Linda, and Tina had no idea what they were about to face, and the realization was setting in that their plans, all of their gloating, had been built on shaky ground. I stayed away, keeping a low profile while everything unfolded. I wasn't going to let them see me gloating or smug. This wasn't about victory. It was about reclaiming my life and standing up for myself after years of being treated like an afterthought. I received a few messages from Mark, but I ignored them. What did he want from me? Sympathy? Understanding? No. He had made his bed, and now he would have to lie in it. 2 days after the eviction notice was delivered, Mark called me again. This time, his voice was desperate. "Jessica, please. You can't do this. We need the house. The rent is due, and without your name on the lease, I don't know how we're going to pay it. We need you. I need you." I didn't respond right away. I could hear him begging on the other end of the phone, his voice shaking with panic. It was like hearing a different person, a man who had taken me for granted for far too long, suddenly realizing the depth of his mistakes. But I wasn't swayed. Not this time. "Mark," I said calmly, "you had your chance. You and your family pushed me out, and now you have to deal with the consequences. I'm done being the one who holds everything together while you and Linda tear it apart." There was a long silence. I could practically feel his guilt washing over him through the phone. "We need you, Jess," he whispered, sounding broken. "I don't know what to do without you." "Good," I replied, "because that's exactly how I've felt for the past few years. Now you get a taste of what it's like to be left behind." I hung up, feeling a weight lift off my shoulders. I wasn't going to be the one to pick up the pieces of their shattered lives anymore. This was their mess to clean up. But I knew the worst was yet to come. The next day, I received a call from the property management company. The rent was still unpaid, and they were sending a final notice of eviction. But they had an added twist. They were also threatening legal action if the rent wasn't paid in full by the end of the week. I forwarded the notice to Mark, along with a message, "Good luck." I knew he wouldn't be able to pull off a miracle this time. Not without me there to bail him out. He had already alienated everyone who could have helped him, and now he was facing the harsh reality of what happens when you don't keep up with your responsibilities. By the end of the week, Mark's world had completely fallen apart. I hadn't heard from Linda in a few days, but when she did reach out, it was nothing like the smug tone I had been used to. "Jessica, please. You have to help us," Linda pleaded, her voice shaky. "Mark is barely holding it together. He can't pay the rent, and we've tried everything. If you could just let us back in." I stopped her right there. "No. I'm not helping you. You've made it clear that I don't matter to you. Now, you're going to have to deal with the consequences of your actions." I could practically hear her frustration mounting on the other end of the phone. "You don't understand, Jessica. This isn't just about a house. Mark is falling apart. He's not himself. He needs you." That was a joke, wasn't it? I had spent years supporting him, making excuses for him, cleaning up his messes. And now, when I finally stood my ground, he was the one who needed me? No. This was their mess to clean up, and they had no one else to blame but themselves. "I understand perfectly," I said, my voice cold. "And it's not my problem anymore. I'm done." I ended the call, feeling a strange sense of peace. For the first time in years, I wasn't at the mercy of their demands. I wasn't living in their shadows, allowing them to dictate my life. I was free. 2 weeks later, the inevitable happened. Mark and Linda were served with an eviction notice. The house that had once been the center of our lives was no longer theirs. The property management company had finally had enough. After the unpaid rent, overdue utilities, and promises that were never kept, they decided to move forward with the eviction. I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction as I read the email confirming it. It wasn't because I enjoyed seeing Mark and Linda suffer, no, it was because I knew they had done this to themselves. They had ignored the red flags, taken me for granted, and pushed me out. Now, they were paying the price for their arrogance and their sense of entitlement. It wasn't long before I received a message from Tina. She'd been staying with her mother, and from what I gathered, Linda had been trying to convince Tina that it was all my fault. I wasn't surprised. After all, Linda had always been the master of manipulation, and now she had an ally in Tina. "Jessica, I don't know what's going on with you," Tina wrote, "but this is our home too. You can't just kick us out like this. I'm pregnant, and I need a place to live." I rolled my eyes at her message. She wasn't asking for help, she was demanding it. She wasn't trying to understand the situation, she was trying to guilt-trip me into feeling bad for her. But I wasn't falling for it. "You should have thought about that before you and your mother decided to make my life miserable," I typed back. "Maybe if you hadn't pushed me out, none of this would have happened. But now, you're on your own. No more handouts. I'm not your safety net anymore." I hit send, feeling a sense of finality wash over me. Months passed, and life began to move on. Mark and Linda had no choice but to find another place to live. And I moved into a small apartment on my own. It was the first time in years that I had felt truly independent, free from the manipulation, the guilt, and the weight of their expectations. Mark and I didn't speak much after the eviction. He'd tried to reach out a few times, but I ignored his calls. I had no intention of going back to him, not after everything that had happened. It was clear to me now that Mark was incapable of changing. He had relied on me for so long that he didn't even know how to take responsibility for his own actions. Linda, on the other hand, was silent. She never reached out after her last desperate plea. I had a feeling she was still trying to find ways to manipulate the situation, but I wasn't falling for it anymore. As for Tina, she eventually left her mother's house and moved into an apartment of her own. I had no idea what happened to her after that, but I didn't really care. The house was no longer my concern. I had reclaimed my independence, and that was all that mattered. The people who had tried to tear me down were now left to pick up the pieces of their own broken lives. They were no longer my burden to carry. And for the first time in a long time, I felt free.